So today I want to explore one of the themes in the Gospel of Thomas that is absolutely a puzzler, and that is there's really no point to the thing at all. There is this invitation to seek, but they don't tell you what you're going to find. And that is one of the great challenges in the Gospel of Thomas. I want to try to unpack that a little bit today. And you heard it a little bit in this text that was read today. You're going to hear it in another one that I'm going to reflect on as well. But you can kind of get it in the sense of the entire Gospel of Thomas is really all about this, this challenge to people to seek that which is in, the inner light that is within you, that God resides in everything. And you heard it, split the wood, and it is there. Just lift up a rock, and it is there. There's this sense that there's something hidden, something secret that you can find if you would but seek, but no one does any of the seeking. And in fact, you remember we started this whole thing, everybody's just drunk on sort of normal everyday life, and they don't even bother to look. And so while there is a secret hidden, no one's doing the work of looking for it. And that's the problem. Isn't that interesting? So what is it that you're seeking? So I want to begin, hopefully you can read some of this. I know my handwriting is atrocious. Atrocious, is that a particular word? Atrocious? My handwriting is atrocious, but you're just going to have to live with it. I'm going to start with the old man from scene 24. Anybody remember what reference that is to? Raise your hand. Nobody? The old man, scene 24? God. All right. Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail. That's the great scene at the Bridge of Death. King Arthur is in search of the Holy Grail. That's what he's seeking, right? He knows what he's seeking. He's seeking the Holy Grail. Him and his tribe are about ready to cross the Bridge of Death. And there's a bridge keeper there from scene 24. God, I can't believe you people don't know this. There's a bridge keeper from scene 24. He's an old man from scene 24. He's the bridge keeper. And he says, you can't cross the Bridge of Death. This is a metaphor for the whole narrative I'm leading you into. You can't cross over the Bridge of Death unless you answer me these questions 3. And the first question is, what is your quest? What are you seeking? And that's the first question. That is the primary question of the Gospel of Thomas. What is it that you're seeking? And I want you to pause for a moment, and because I'm going to give you a chance after communion to reflect on this too by lighting a candle and thinking about what is it that you are seeking. If you think about your own religious journey, your spiritual life, the way in which you have participated maybe in congregational life or other forms of building a spiritual path, what is it? What are you looking for? What are you seeking? And sometimes I think we don't really even know. We just participate thinking maybe something will change in our life, or we don't actually have a goal for our spiritual lives. We just do it. I grew up being drugged to church, right, like many of you, and I didn't even know why we were going. I had to figure out, well, I just have to do this, and maybe something good will come out of it. But as I've grown older, I have the sense of, well, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you're seeking? Is it a sense of wholeness? Is it salvation? And what's that? What? If I were to ask you that question, you should think about it. What are you seeking when you show up every Sunday, or in whatever practice you're engaged in? And I'd be curious if you could put some language around it, but my guess is it's not easy. My guess is those words don't come quickly. So, what is the object of this journey we're on? To go back to the scene, just in case you remember it, the first question was, what are you seeking? And of course, every one of King Arthur's trio would say, oh, we're seeking the Holy Grail. So they knew exactly what they were seeking. But the second question got a little bit more complicated. And if you got it right, you were well on your way to crossing the bridge. If you got it wrong, you were in trouble. You wouldn't be able to cross the bridge. So you should watch that scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. What are you seeking is the question. In the Gospel of Thomas, what we find again and again is that's what it's all about. Are you seeking at all? Because that's what the Gospel of Thomas, so much of it is about you need to do the work of seeking. And if you do the work of seeking, you will find. And then if you were to ask the Gospel of Thomas, and you can pour through every one of these phrases, well, what is it that I'm going to find? There's no answer. They don't ever tell you. It's almost intentional in the Gospel of Thomas that there is never anything that they tell you you are going to find if you do the seeking. They leave that completely open. There's nothing there. And it's completely unnerving for many people to think that there is just an invitation to seek and the promise that you will stumble into finding the big secret of life itself, but we're not actually going to tell you what that is. Like, we're not going to tell you what you're going to find. You can even hear you remember the Gospel of Thomas is based on what they think might have been sort of the oral teachings of Jesus. So they think these date back to some of the original kind of ways in which Jesus was engaging. One of them, you can hear it sometimes in Jesus' parables, right? Jesus would start off like, the kingdom of heaven, or the thing that you're all trying to find, is like a treasure hidden in a field. So the assumption is that there's something buried below the surface of the life that you've constructed. It's like treasure hidden in a field, which a person just stumbles upon. And when they find that treasure, they sell everything they have. This sounds a lot like the Gospel of Thomas to me. They sell everything that they have and they buy that field. That's the end of the narrative, right? It also has that same kind of open-ended feel. When you stumble into the treasure, give yourself to it. But it doesn't really tell you what that treasure is. So you see and hear the same thing in the ministry of Jesus oftentimes, but the Gospel of Thomas is very much all about seeking and not telling you exactly what you're going to find. So what might that mean? I think I can read another example story of that. Here's one. This is number 17. It does a little bit of the same thing. Jesus says, I will give you what no eye has ever seen, what no ear has ever heard, what no hand has ever touched, what has not arisen at all in the human heart. That's it. Just this promise that there is something there is kind of buried inside of this Gospel of Thomas narrative over and over again. So what's possibly going on? And I don't know that I have all, obviously, the answers, but I've got something to share with you here today. One of the things that we find in the Gospel of Thomas is much different than what we find in the Gospels. So I kind of gave you a side-by-side comparison of where both might lead you. And then I'm going to switch and kind of unpack this a little bit. The Gospel of Thomas is all about seeking. So maybe you could think about your spiritual life if you were going to think about using the Gospel of Thomas, which is a very, robust indicator of the way in which Jesus might have thought, is really do the work of seeking, trusting that there is, like the Gospel of Thomas always says, there is some spark within you and within everything, even in the wood that is split, even in the stone that is turned over. There is something there, but you need to do the seeking. And the spiritual life or the religious life is just acknowledging that, saying, I will be a lifelong seeker of that spark. You don't have to get all anxious about what you're going to find. You just have to be the seeker. So that's a great part of the Gospel of Thomas. But you'll also find that in the Gospels. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened, right? Ask and it will be given unto you. You hear that language in the Gospels too. The Gospels also invite you to continue this journey of seeking. But then they start to part ways. For the Gospel of Thomas, the way of seeking is a very radical lifestyle. It is one of pulling away from the dominant culture or the cultural norms. And they did it in such a way that it turned them all, particularly the followers of this kind of Thomas spirituality, into what they would call itinerant wisdom seekers, right? They would disconnect from family, vocation, any kind of social structure. They just pulled themselves away from it. And they tried to just live as a kind of a wandering sage. Well, I don't know about you, but if you have kids who say, hey, I'm going to live as a wandering sage, you'd be like, it's just not going to work. You got to come up with something to do with your life, right? We don't like wandering sages. This is a hard life. And it's certainly not a life that you would ever institutionalize. So the Gospel of Thomas community lived this kind of lifestyle because they thought that would help them find what they were looking for. That started to fade quickly when the gospel started to find its way into everyday life, because the gospels, rather than asking you to live this kind of radical life that extracts yourself from society altogether, tried to create community life. Like, how could we do this together as a community? So the whole, common meal tradition and gathering together weekly and the behaviors of building a community was what our gospel narratives try to do. That's a completely different program than what the Gospel of Thomas was trying to do. And then the last piece was that for the Gospels, the goal, obviously Jesus was elevated as he becomes the kind of the goal of our whole common life. We come together to worship Jesus, to worship Jesus and God and the Spirit. We create something that is the objective of why we gather. And that allows us to become an institutional or organized religion because we're building a common life together. And so you can see it. I put down on the bottom there the OSLC. That's what we're birthed out of this whole gospel narrative. We build community life together. We behave in certain ways that try to do good in the world. It's all about building community. And even in the ELCA Constitution, right, we've institutionalized through our Constitution how we will think about who Jesus is at the center of our common life. So Jesus takes a dominant role in our shared life together. If you think about maybe when you're first thinking about religious life, the answer to every question in confirmation is oftentimes Jesus. If you can get to Jesus, then you've got it figured out. Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the way. So we definitely put a lot of weight on the shoulders of Jesus. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus doesn't matter. Jesus is not the point of this at all. In fact, you'll find in the Gospel of Thomas over and over again of Jesus saying, look, I'm not, what are you doing? You don't follow me. You look within to the God that's trying to birth itself out from you. You look under the rock. You split the wood. That Spirit will come out when you do that work. It's all about your work. You are on that journey too. So that's a completely different narrative than the one we've been following as we've been dominated, in a sense, by the gospel telling. So a couple things. One, why is it, let's see, do I have time? Yeah, I think I can quickly do this. Why is it that this whole notion of seeking and not disclosing what you'll find became so dominant in the Gospel of Thomas? Why did that happen? And scholars kind of give you two examples. Oh, what's happening? Can you believe there's something on the other side of the whiteboard? So why the implied secret wisdom that's hidden? And scholars think there's a couple reasons why that might be the case. And this is sort of a little wonkish, but I think it's helpful. One is that the early Thomas community that was out there, the itinerant community that was wandering around from town to town. They had no income. They were dependent on the town to welcome them. They would try to build this insight, and then they would leave town. Well, they were losing authority because quickly people were responding to more of the gospel narratives and building common life together, like just normal, everyday Christianity. And so they were seen as sort of an outsider group, and they couldn't maintain their authority over the growth of the church. So that they could tell you, well, we are the keepers of the secret wisdom, allowed them some sense of authority, right? You, and in many ways, John's gospel is like an example of the opposite of what they would be doing. They were saying, you actually, people who are building this sort of common life, you're getting it wrong. We are the holders of the secret teachings of Jesus. And so they kind of held secretly on to their authority by keeping it secret. So that's one possible reason why secret wisdom was so dominant in the Gospel of Thomas literature that we find. The other one, and this one Paul had the same problem, was because they were itinerant. They would show up in a community like this one. Let's say we were hanging around and we worked like they did back in the day, and someone would come and tell us, how we to do the seeking, and then they would talk to us about it, get us all excited about it. Then they would leave because they're always on the move. And we would be here talking about, well, what do we do with this? And we would start to come up with some ideas, and maybe we'd create some models for how you might do that. And then that itinerant person would come back and go, oh my God, what are you people thinking? You got it all wrong, right? They would have to manage communities who would take this content maybe in a different direction than they had intended. And if you look in Paul's Gospels, Paul's writings, he was constantly wrestling with this problem. Right? He would come to Corinth and he would say, look, I'm going to teach you the gospel, and then I'm going to go off. And when he went off, he realized that they kind of started going down the wrong path, and so he had to go back. And you get 2 Corinthians, he had to go back to Corinth again, try to straighten all the mess up that they had made of his, gospel proclamation. So there's this constant battle of keeping communities sort of on track. And so to be able to say, we are the keepers of the wisdom, we come in and you listen to us, we have authority, we have authoritative voices, we're the ones who are helping you, that could be part of the reason why everything remains so hidden. But scholars are a little bit baffled about why they wouldn't disclose what the point of this whole thing is. But that could be two of the possibilities. All right, so I just had to do that. Oh, jeez. Oh, that's great. I love when that kind of thing happens. All right, so now that we've had that drama in our lives, so what might this mean? And I'm going to work on this next week. So I want to say, what are the implications for who Jesus is for us now that we know about this kind of content of the Gospel of Thomas? What are the implications for how we think about Jesus? And I think two things, and we'll talk a little bit about it next week as well. One, Jesus is not a divine figure. Jesus is someone who's been doing the seeking, and it has given him a different vision for how life should be led. And he's trying to invite us to do the same seeking. See, that's a different kind of story than Jesus being the answer to all the religious questions. Jesus, in the Gospel of Thomas, does not have a theology. There is no theology. It's more methodology. It's about doing the work of seeking. It's not about creating the outcome, the theological narrative that you're going to believe to be true. That's a completely different scenario than the one you and I grew up with. We thought that Jesus, Son of God, now divine, was telling us about how the world works. That's not the Gospel of Thomas Jesus. So, in many ways, we have to sort of ask ourselves the question, if we thought that could be a possibility about the way we think about Jesus, then what are the implications for church life if that's the Jesus we've got. And for many scholars who look at the Gospel of Thomas, they say that is as close to the original Jesus as we could possibly ever get. And yet the church developed because these gospel narratives and this need for kind of building collective identity took us in the direction of the church that we know so well today. But there are other options. And how might they influence the future of church today? And so next week I'm going to look a little bit at that, and then I'm going to introduce you to some of the ideas coming out of the Westar Institute that has been doing a lot of work on the Gospel of Thomas, to try to say, as they think about what could religious life look like if it integrated some of the ways in which the Gospel of Thomas is trying to kind of articulate this life of Jesus, what might that look like for us? And I think you're going to find some of that really interesting too. So that's where we're going to go next week. So today, we just wanted to start with the old man from scene 24. What's your quest? What are you looking for? I'll tell you that if you could end your religious perspective with just this phrase, the seeking matters. So your work just turning over stones, splitting wood, looking within, paying attention in a meaningful way, that's it. Don't get too ahead of yourself and thinking you're going to get an answer. Just keep doing the seeking. That's the message of the Gospel of Thomas out of scene 24. But what might that mean for us collectively moving forward? That's an intriguing question, and we'll take that one up next week. Okay? All right, any questions or thoughts? I'm going to give you just a chance. Bruce has a microphone. Where are you, Bruce? There you are. Bruce has a microphone. Like, anything about this was super unnerving, puzzling, insightful, anything that you want to contribute, we'll just take a moment and see if there's anybody who wants to add anything. Yeah, please. Why don't you use this microphone, because then you'll be live with us. Please, Laura.
Jan, I thank you. That was really a very good teaching, I thought. I think that's harder, what you're describing.
Yeah.
Seeking is harder than having all the answers. So it's a hard job.
Yeah, I think, and that's exactly, remember when we started out, one of the early texts in the Gospel of Thomas is like, you're all so lazy. I mean, it's basically to your point. That's the reason why no one's waking up, because you're all too lazy, because it's hard work. And that's why you'd rather have a cocktail than really do the heavy lifting. And we all kind of know that, we all kind of feel that, right? Like, well, I'd much rather take the road less traveled, which is the one that is kind of given to me, handed to me. So, really interesting insight. Julie?
I think part of it is maybe you're not seeking the answer, one answer, but there's answers, multiple answers along the way. And the real hard part, as well as the seeking, of course, the hard part is, what do you do with that? It's always, what do you do now that you have an answer? That's our responsibility.
Yeah, interesting.
Take it further.
So yeah, I like the way you're taking that, Julie. Julie's taking it not only into the seeking, but as you find, how do you adjust your life to reflect the wisdom that you're discovering along the way, which is kind of an ethical, how do I live, so how then shall I live, given that? That's an interesting addition to this. There are no real huge ethical mandates in the Gospel of Thomas, so they don't quite take you all the way there. But that's a really good question. Who else? That's a couple good ones there. Yeah. Trudy?
Well, I'm kind of struck by how similar this is to Buddhism. When Buddha left everything and went to seek, and it's almost an overlay of the same idea that you have to seek. It's not going to be given to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and Islam is the same way, right? So Muhammad, too, was looking for an alternative to sort of the dissonance in his social fabric. Buddha, very similar. One of the great things I love about what Trudy mentions about in Buddhism, like one of the great sermons in Buddhism is a disciple coming to the feet of the Buddha looking for answers, and the Buddha hands him a flower, and he says, there you go. Right? There's no, like, well, wait a minute. I want answers. Tell me how this works. You don't get that. You get just the passing of the flower, right? What's that all about? That's what you're telling me? You're handing me a flower? So it's got a same kind of intrigue. I also think, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think there's a certain part of this that's super appropriate for our time when the world is so diverse, right? How do we honor the journey everybody's on rather than judging the outcome of the answer that they committed their lives to? So there's a shift that can happen in the way in which we think about each other, in that, well, tell me about your journey, because I know now the journey matters. And the outcome is going to change as the journey continues, right? So why get so attached to the solution and then judge the solution? Well, no, that's wrong. So it gives you there's some wiggle room here that I think is very intriguing. All right, any final, one more comment? No? Well, thank you for listening. Obviously, this is complicated material, and the technology is just mind-boggling, the whole whiteboard thing. We'll see if we can improve on that next week. All right.